to the newest episode of On the Odd. If you enjoy On the Odd, please consider supporting the show at patreon.com/ontheodd.
From the paranormal to the extraordinary, from the weird to the wonderful, this is On the Odd.
Had something on your mind, you had something to say, yet you came around in that familiar way. All your pleasantries the same, slow in control. Then you walked away in that same damn way. Oh Lena, why are your eyes so dry?
Hello, this is Mark, and you are listening to On the Odd. Today we have a very special guest. We have author Andrew Collins. He's a popular writer of history, archaeology, and science. For over 30 years, he has explored the relationship between archaic religious beliefs and the cosmos, examining the origins of human civilization, the development of technology, and the inspirations behind magic and religion. His discoveries have led to several thought-provoking books that challenge the way we think about the past, including From the Ashes of Angels and Gateway to Atlantis. He is also the organizer of the Questing Conference, Britain's premier event on alternative history, forbidden archaeology, and ancient wisdom. Please welcome to the show, Andrew Collins.
Good day, Mark. Coming to you from England here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. This works perfectly, because here it's 9 a.m. and there it's kind of, for me it's perfect anyway, but 2 p.m., that's not too bad, right?
Well, I don't get up until late anyway, so to me it's still the morning. So
my kid had me up at 7.
On US time these days.
So we were talking just a little bit about your book, I think it's your newest book, The Cygnus Key.
Yeah.
And for one, I just want to say, I'm looking at it right now, and I always, I'm like a little kid when I flip through the book, I'll thumb it really fast. I think it's the child in me looking for the pictures, and you have really beautiful pictures in here. It's like on a heavyweight paper, and there's just a number of archaeological finds in here that support a lot of what you talk about, and beautiful artwork from people who recreated things that support your theories, and they're more than theories, actually. I mean, you find so many correlations between things that it's hard to just call them a theory. I wanted to just ask you, how did you first get involved in the topic of this? Have you always had a fascination with, I guess, getting to the root of creation, or not creation, but where things came from, and ancient civilizations?
Well, I think I've always had it since I was a child. I just want to know the answers of everything. I mean, I want to know where we came from, what we're doing here, where we're going. I want to know what ghosts are. I want to know what UFOs are. I want to know why we have dreams. I mean, anything with a question mark after it has always interested me. And it was these types of question that I would talk to friends walking around the block when I was 10 years of age. Mm-hmm. And I really lost it. And I started in my early youth to actually investigate UFOs. And that sort of eventually changed to the paranormal, the Earth mysteries, and then eventually to more sensible things like ancient history and archaeology. But, I mean, all of it is of interest to me. And, I try to sort of write sensible books on the subject, and they reflect the way that I feel. It's like I find things out I need to tell people, and the way I express it is within these books. And we're at a stage now which is so interesting because we're pushing back the origins of civilization almost to the beginning of modern human history. which you can say probably begins around 45,000 years ago with the start of what's known as the Upper Paleolithic Age. I mean, Paleolithic means the Old Stone Age. And this is really when we started coming into our own. You know, we left Africa probably around 60,000 years ago, and we ventured into the Eurasian continent. And some people went west and encountered the Neanderthals. And a lot of people went to the east and they encountered a different type of what we call archaic human. And their name is Denisovan. And we didn't even know they existed until around the year 2012, because it was at this time that the genome of a bone that had been found in a place called the Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia revealed the existence of this new type of human population, one we had no knowledge of. But what's coming out from this is the fact that these Denisovans were very widespread and existed from several 100,000 years ago down to about 40,000 years ago, that they were incredibly advanced, far more advanced than our own ancestors at this time, far more advanced than the Neanderthals, who we don't actually give credit for how advanced they were. But the Denisovans were in a league of their own. And what we now realise is that they created not just the most beautiful jewellery. I mean, your listeners should look up immediately the Denisovan bracelet, for instance. This is an incredible bangle, polished sword.
Is that the one that's made of charidolite?
It's made of something called clitorite.
All right, I'm butchering it.
A form of chlorite, which is green, which gives it its green colour. And it's incredible. I mean, not only is it different in artificial and natural light, it changes colour, but also there is a hole that's pierced through it.
I read about this, and this blows. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this really made me kind of go and really start paying attention to what you were talking about. I don't know. This is the one that was the snap, and I was like, hold on. And yeah, I can't wait to hear you talk about this, just because it's one of these things where it's like lost technology or something, like something we just genuinely do not understand. And I'm sorry for interrupting. It's just, this is the thing that really hit me.
Well, it's 60 to 70,000 years old. Let's get that in first. And it's that whereas the drill that was used cut through the stone so fast that it's comparable to that of a modern day drilling technique. And this is quite extraordinary, but this doesn't necessarily mean that the Denisovans had electric drills.
No.
But what it does mean is that they worked out how to create very fast running drills. They may have used something like water, like a tiny mill, on a long axis with a stone at the end of it that was able to cut.
I think it's just as amazing of a concept, though.
Well, I mean, it is, but there's more. I mean, the Denisovans would appear to have created the first musical instruments in the form of the fragments of a whistle or flute found within this Denisova cave. They also rode horses, quite possibly. This has come from the evidence of DNA and bones of horses found inside the Denisova cave. This has been seriously put forward.
70,000 years ago, though.
Yeah,
it was unheard of.
And they also manufactured the first bone needles, which almost certainly they used to create tailored clothing, a little different than what might have been worn a few hundred years ago. And these were incredibly advanced people. And what we also know about them is that they were extremely large in stature. This is something that's only been confirmed in the last couple of weeks, but something that I've been writing about since 2014, because the bones and the teeth that's been found in connection with them are all extremely large. And although the archaeologists were reluctant to conclude anything from this, it becomes clear, excuse me, that these were big people. I mean, possibly the size of a modern day huge wrestler, basically.
Like an Andre the Giant, right? Because
Exactly.
you show a picture in one of your lectures, and the guy is huge. I mean, he's just a big, huge guy, like maybe 7 foot something.
Yeah, and so it starts to become possible that the Denisovans are the giants of legend. And that's so interesting because in the very area of the Altai Mountains, the legends connected with giants there suggest that they were the ancestors of modern human clans and tribes, but that they also gave us some of the firsts in inventions, everything from stone bridges to stone houses to irrigation to the first musical instruments. So things like this. These are all legends and stories coming out of the very areas that we know that the Denisovans existed down to about 40,000 years ago. And their legacy continued in their hybrid descendants, because we know that the Denisovans mated not only with the Neanderthals, but also with modern humans. There are a whole number of modern populations in southern, eastern and in northern Asia that show the DNA and ancestry of the Denisovans. So we know that they spread far and wide. In other words, our ancestors carried this ancestry to the furthest reaches of the Eurasian continent, and almost certainly beyond that into the Americas, which is something that I'm looking at now for a new book. And this, so, and you start to think, well, who were these guys? I mean, what was their impact on human civilization, particularly if they were more advanced than us at this time?
Mm-hmm. One of the things also is that you're very thorough with all of your work, and I wanted to know if you could even just say, what is Cygnus? I mean, I know it's a constellation, but the book being called the Cygnus Key, I think if you could just give an overview of what exactly Cygnus is and the constellation, and maybe why they chose that, and one of the things I think is really fascinating, I love this, is when you start seeing all the connections that you put together, because you have these stars in the sky, and all of a sudden you take these clearly man-made structures, and they're just lining up kind of perfectly. There's something very complete too. When you see this, there's a certain level of human. I can't explain it perfectly, but there's something that makes me have hope, maybe, that...
Well, that's nice.
No, it does. It gives me hope that we have been here for a very long time. I mean, of course, if you're, strictly, a religious person, you believe, it's, we're only here for a few thousand years. But I don't buy into that. And it's just, finding these keys and these clues, and then having someone like you tie it together. I don't know. I just think that it does give hope. It shows that we've been here for so long, and hopefully we're going to be here for for much longer. That it's if you turn on the news, it's a matter of hours before we perish. But I don't know. It gives me hope, personally.
Well, that's important. But in answer to your question about Cygnus, well, I mean, firstly, the book's called The Cygnus Key. So you might say, well, what Cygnus got to do with this? Well, Cygnus basically just is the Latin word for swan. And swans are one of the primary symbols of the soul, right the way throughout the Eurasian continent and even in North America. It was believed that before incarnation and after death, the soul of a person takes the form of a bird. Now, the type of bird can change. I mean, we're talking about swans here, but it can also be eagles or hawks. In the Middle East, for instance, it's vultures. And these are soul birds. These because it was believed that the soul had to transform into something. We didn't remain almost like Superman flying through the air after death. That we became something else. And that transition, that transmigration of the soul was done by either us becoming a bird or being accompanied by a bird, from this world into the afterlife or the land of the dead. And this seems to be an incredibly ancient concept, particularly in association with the swan, which is the oldest symbol of the soul in the form of a bird and goes back at least 24,000 years. And is found in connection with a human community at a place called Malta on the Angara River to the west of this huge inland sea called Lake Baikal in southern Siberia, very close to the area that we're talking about in connection with the Denisovans. And what's quite clear is that these ideas were inherited even at that stage from a much earlier culture or human population. And the reason why Cygnus by name is important is because this is the name of a constellation in the sky. It's also more commonly known as the Northern Cross. I mean, if you go out into your back garden now and look up in the sort of mid to late evening, you'll see the stars of Cygnus directly above you right now. And they are prominently positioned on the Milky Way, where the Milky Way splits in two. And this has, since the Paleolithic times, been seen as a point of entry and exit into this land of the dead, or this, this heaven of ancient times, or the afterlife in general. And once again, this seems to be something that's tied in with this symbol of the swan itself, the Cygnus bird. And what's also important here is that when we look at the sky, we see the sky revolving around a certain point. That's known as the northern celestial pole. Today it's marked by a star we call the pole star, Polaris. But in the past, there were other stars that marked this particular point in the sky that was seen as this entry and exit to the sky world. And most prominently, this was connected with the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. And at various times in the past, Cygnus has marked this point of entry and exit into the sky world. In other words, there is a number of reasons why Cygnus became associated with the entrance and exit into the afterlife. This would seem to have been there at least 24,000 years ago. And what I say is that the time before that, what seems to be important to these stars being seen as the entry into this cosmic point of origin of life, was around 40 to 45,000 years ago. And it's at this point that the Denisovans disappear, but their legacy is handed to our earliest modern human ancestors, and that they would seem to have brought these ideas forward in the belief that somehow we have this point of origin in the sky to do with Cygnus the swan, and that we ourselves come from the swan, that our earliest ancestors were associated with the symbol of a swan. And this is remembered even to this day by a large number of clans and tribes in the area of Siberia and the Altai Mountains, and in neighbouring Mongolia and in Central Asia, that the swan is the symbol of our ancestor, generally a female ancestor. And I think this relates not to a particular woman or anything like that, or even to a goddess, but to a point of time, a point that we gained, our own individuality as, as the human population, the human race itself.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is also when viewing the sky, in general, here on Long Island, I can go in my backyard and see a few stars at night, if on a clear night. On a really clear night, you can see more than just a few. But when we go camping, say upstate, you get away from the city a little bit, you can really see the sky. But back when you're talking about, it's like 45,000 years ago and plus, there was very little light pollution, if any, really. I mean, there was no real light source at night. So when you're viewing the sky, I'm assuming you could just see the sky in a way that we couldn't even imagine right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Milky Way, for instance. I mean, we all know about it. It's the edge of our own Milky Way, galaxy. We see it as this band of light that goes across the sky, but we barely see it today. I mean, if I go to my back garden in southeast England and look up, I can hardly see it.
Right.
I've only actually seen it properly once in my life, and that was in the desert in Texas. And I remember seeing the Milky Way stretching from one horizon right the way across the other. It was like a white, rainbow in the middle of the night, basically. And it's when you see it like this, you start to realise how important the Milky Way must have been to our ancestors. It was quite literally a road or river to the stars. And there was a particular point on it where the Milky Way appears to split in two. It's known as the Dark Rift. And as I said, this takes place in the proximity of the stars of Cygnus, the celestial swan or the Northern Cross. And this was the point that they were interested in. This was the point that took you out of this world into the other world itself. And there are a lot of other interesting things going on in the Cygnus region. I mean, for instance, the first black hole ever discovered, was there. There are types of cosmic rays coming out of Cygnus that are absolutely unique, that may well affect human evolution. There are stars there that have been associated with, alien megastructures and alien intelligences. There's lots of reasons why our ancestors may have looked in that area of the sky and said, there's something important about that spot there on the Milky Way. And that over generations, thousands of generations, they may have come to the idea that our souls, our point of origin is out there in space, and that someday we will go back there. And I think that this is important because there are monuments all over the world, from the three pyramids of Giza, including the Great Pyramid itself, to the 11,500-year-old stone temple found on top of a mountain in southeast Turkey, a place called Göbekli Tepe, to mound complexes in North America, all over the world. You have these alignments to the stars of Cygnus. Why? Clearly the ancients saw this area of the sky as very important, and I think it's something that we're only now beginning to understand again for the very first time.
Right, it was kind of a shared knowledge without being able to physically share this knowledge.
Well, this would not have been knowledge that was known to the general public. It would have been something that was known by elite groups.
Right, that's what I mean. I mean, people who have the power to create monuments or structures.
Exactly. This was powerful information. Where we come from and where we go in death. I mean, this wouldn't have been known to everybody.
No.
It would have been known by the priests, the shamans, the elite groups. And what's so interesting about this is that in America, these mound complexes, you often find that at the centre of these mounds, you have this very large, human figure, character, the skeleton of, and around the outside of them there are normal size human skeletons. And it does appear very possible that the elites of these Native American First Peoples mound building cultures were of great stature. I've suggested in various books that they are Denisovan hybrids, and that the Denisovans were the people that had this knowledge, and they passed them on to their hybrids, who eventually reached North America and became the controlling groups of Native American, cultures like the Adena.
Oh, that's interesting. I think a lot of people would say, "Oh yeah, well this is great, this is fine," and they still kind of don't think that these are and intelligent people. I don't know why in the general public they feel this, but one of the things that you talk about in your book is the geometry and the math behind all of this is solid. It's not made up. It's not like, hey, build a pyramid, yeah, right over there. These are people who understood theories. They understood math and geometry. These weren't just cavemen types, that we don't, like you mentioned before, we don't give enough credit to. And I'm just like basically putting them down in that comment. But, these are people who really studied math and geometry and these things and put it to work. And these are the remnants of that work, I think. And one of the things that you had pointed out that what makes a lot of sense is that the way these people thought is a very calculated and a very mathematical way, much like a savant or, right now autism is very prevalent in the world. And a lot of times, my nephew is autistic, but he's extremely he's remarkable when it comes to the theory behind patterns and math. He's not like a Rain Man or a genius like that, but he understands the concept and can discuss it comfortably at a young age. So I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that and what supports that theory, I guess, aside from just the math.
Okay, well, firstly, the most obvious example of architecture with an incredible amount of maths and geometry involved is the Great Pyramid in Egypt. There's just so much connected with it. Whether it be to do with pi, phi, golden this, the golden that. Mm-hmm. There is so much involved with the construction of the Great Pyramid that you have to say, well, what type of architect created all of this? They must have been a genius. Well, I think they probably were. But the bigger question comes is, where did they get this knowledge around 2500 BC?
Right.
And what I do is to say that this knowledge had been around for tens of thousands of years up to that point, and the Great Pyramid is almost like the final legacy, the final, flowering of these ideas, before, in many ways, we lose a lot of them. And I take it back 24,000 years ago. I already mentioned this place called Malta, near Lake Baikal in southern Siberia, this very early human community that was incredibly advanced. I associate it with Denisovan hybrids because it does seem as if there are links, certainly in their material culture, with the Denisovans from the Altai Mountains. But what's interesting is that there is a relic, an item found there known as the Malta plate, and on it there are a series of 7 spirals made out of pecked holes, basically. And each of these spirals has a very specific number connected with it, with the amount of peck marks. And if you add up these different spirals, it comes to even more interesting numbers. And a Russian archaeologist who was involved with the discovery of this started to realise that these numbers were all connected with cyclic time based upon the movement of the sun and the moon, and also eclipse cycles over a very long period of time based on periods of 54 years, which is known as the so-called triple Saros cycle, and that what was being implied by this plate is that it was being used as a mnemonic device, perhaps as a teaching aid to pupils, to get them to understand the knowledge of the celestial objects and the way that they moved around the sky. But, there was even beyond that. What was coming from it are key numbers that we find in sacred architecture and sacred literature around the world. Numbers like 54, 108, 432. and these are found in places like Borobudur Temple, Buddhist temple in Java, at Angkor Wat in Cambodia. They're in Indian Vedic literature. They're even in Norse mythology and Mesopotamian mythology. And yet, all of these key numbers, these cosmic numbers, are found 24,000 years ago at this place called Malta in Siberia. And this got me thinking, is it possible that these are some legacy from the Denisovans themselves? And it was at that point that I found that the Denisovans had two key genes, as revealed from their genome, relating specifically to autism. And these same genes within modern human populations, when switched on, create these savant-like mindsets, which you talked about. And of course, these savant-like mindsets can do everything from calendar count, the idea that you can know the day of the week of a particular date any time into the future or any time into the past. This is what some savant-like people can do, or that they can create musical masterpieces out of nothing, or replicate them just by listening to them once, or be able to paint without any kind of training or education. I mean, the sort of things that we associate with autistic people on the autistic spectrum.
Right. They didn't have maybe an 88-key piano in front of them, but they had this ability, and they put it to work. Like you said, that there was even a flute, that was found.
Right. Yeah.
But you mentioned that the tuning of the flute is tuned to what we today understand. I'm not good with this, but 4/3 or
yeah, I mean, it's what we call musical intervals. Now, I'm not a musician, so
I am, and I should know this.
I have to learn very carefully myself. But essentially, what we find is that within sacred architecture and literature around the world is a importance not just in certain notes, but in the combination of two different notes to create these harmonic, resonances being able to be produced either by musical instruments or by the shape of architecture, the rooms, for instance. And these can be defined by certain shape, particularly the 4/3 shape or the 3/2 shape, which are essentially inverse forms of each other. And these are known as the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. And these are not only found at places like the Great Pyramid in Egypt and Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey, but there's a story from the Altai Mountains where the Denisovans were, that the musical instrument known as the komis was actually invented by the giants after they heard some fairy maiden or supernatural maiden creating these sounds, and that when they went to investigate, they did not find her, but they found this hole in the ground that was the shape of this musical instrument, which they forever used to create this particular type of musical interval. And what's interesting about this is that the komis, as a stringed instrument, not only has the neck and head of a swan, I mean, in appearance, but that very specifically it's attuned to the perfect fourth, the 4/3. This seems to be really important, which suggests strongly that these ideas to do with the importance of musical intervals actually possibly comes from the Denisovans themselves, who would appear to have manufactured the earliest musical instruments in the form of a whistle or a flute found within the Denisova cave.
That's a really powerful discovery. It really is. I mean, to find the root of where modern or even ancient music came from, to understand, I mean, just the whole philosophy behind it, a perfect A is 440 hertz. It's, it's amazing to me that they were able to even tune things. It's almost like, what is it based on? What is, and they somehow did it, I love the fact that you dive deeper and deeper and deeper. I just wanted to ask, and I don't see much of a relationship to this, and I know that you do enjoy looking. You also have a book called Light Quest: Your Guide with Seeing and Interacting with UFOs, Mystery Lights, and Plasma Intelligences. So I have to ask the question: do you see any correlation? The more you look into the physical remnants of our past, because this book, the Cygnus Key, really touches upon things it's all tangible. It's all based upon actual math, actual discoveries, physical objects, right? So when you look deeper and deeper into this, do you see less and less of a paranormal relationship, or you meant the interaction with an alien species, or even the belief of a time travel type of thing? And, I have to ask the question just because it's, I think a lot of people would say, well, why didn't you ask? I just wanted to know. I just don't know if it steers you away from it. It's just, the more you learn about something, the more you maybe dismiss things. That's all.
Yeah, no, it's all part of a bigger picture, and it's all coming together. I mean, once again, we have to ask ourselves, who were the Denisovans, and how far did they get? What did they achieve before they died out around 40,000 years ago? And what did they pass on as a legacy to us? Mm-hmm. Did they know that their end was coming? Did they deliberately interbreed with our ancestors because they knew that that's how they would continue on themselves? I mean, these are questions which, are almost philosophical in a way.
Sure.
That we can debate them and come up with some great ideas, which is exactly what I do. But the question as to what exactly is going on is based on what I would call entanglement, quantum entanglement. The idea that today we are finding out about a human population that could well have been the giants of legend for the first time. We didn't know the Denisovans existed until 2012. And what's so interesting is that in the very area where the Denisovans, existed, there is a very strange place called Agaki. It's this massive elevated platform on the top of a mountain that has these two huge great horns made of granite. One is about 250 yards in height, the other one's about 150 yards in height. And, the whole thing's astronomically aligned towards the moon at its most northerly, possibly the Milky Way and the Cygnus constellation or whatever. But that's not what's important here. What's important is that there are legends, stories to do with the fact that this was the place of the giants. This is the place where they would come together and meet in the past. And that one of them actually became, Stone himself, and his outline is seen within the hills of Agaki. But it's said that one day he will rise again, and that there is a stone right on the edge of a precipice, this huge, great block of stone. And it said that when this stone falls down into a local lake, the giants will rise again. Well, it was reported only a couple of years ago that this rock has started to crack and will fall very soon. I mean, this is without, this is a spoiler for the book here. I talk all about the end of the book. And when I read this, I thought, isn't that fascinating? That at the very time that these giants of legend are rising again through archaeology and genetics, that this prophecy is now being fulfilled. Now, most people would say, well, it's coincidence. But I like to look at it as a deeper cyclic thing that somehow, the Denisovans are reaching through time to us now and saying, look, we existed and we're on the way back, and that the prophecy will be fulfilled. So I like that. I like that.
Me too. That I don't believe. I believe some coincidences can exist, but a 40,000-year-old coincidence, it seems a little too coincidental.
Yeah, I mean, which brings the question, are we in touch with the Denisovans? Is it possible that through quantum entanglement, which is the idea that particles can be entangled, forever linked, no matter how far away that they get, and that if you see infinite seas of these particles, in my head, in your head, in everybody else's head, that, the partner of one of mine is in your head, and et cetera, et cetera. In other words, if they're all doing the same dance, this gives us, the answers for something like telepathy. And in the knowledge that entanglement exists beyond space-time, it's not affected by linear time, then, is it possible that, that we can actually connect in mind with the Denisovans and find out who they were and, give us insights into their world? I'd like to think that is possible. I mean, I work with intuitive people, and sometimes they get some great ideas. And you think, well, where did they come from? Where did that idea come from? And then a couple of years later, it's confirmed. So how is that possible? And I think that the answer is quantum entanglement.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at our, 150 years on this planet, it's, the amount of technological advancements that have happened. It can't be just a coincidence that in the past 150 years we've come so far. Prior to that, for thousands of years, there was no real evolution when it comes to technology for the most part. It was very, very slow moving. I do believe your theory on quantum entanglement is something that I think is solid. Did the Denisovans, did they show any evidence of believing in an afterlife?
It's too early to.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, all we can say is what we find in connection with the hybrid communities that existed thereafter, and what they believed. And I come back to this place called Malta. It's such an important place. I mean,
what is it called? I'm sorry, Malta?
Malta. I mean, it's MAL'Ta, and it's very close to Lake Baikal, which is this huge inland sea in southern central Siberia. And that some of the earliest modern human communities existed there, with clear links to the Altai Mountains and the Denisova Cave, where we know the Denisovans, were present for an extremely long period of time, possibly even 100,000 years or more. So we can certainly say that there's a good chance that these were hybrid communities. In other words, that a lot of their ideas came from the fact that their ancestors had interbred with both Denisovans and possibly even Neanderthals. And even archaeologists believe that it's possible that a lot of the advances, the first for humanity that occurred in this region, did so as a result of contact with these earlier so-called archaic human populations of the region. Which, by the way, I think it's important to point out that, the Denisovans were very big, like your largest wrestlers, but the Neanderthals, who were also in this area, were very small. I mean, some of them around 5 feet tall, whereas modern humans were somewhere in between. And it's easy to imagine that the area of southern Siberia at this time was like the Middle Earth of a J.R. Tolkien, novel, like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings or something like that, with the orcs and the fairies and the giants and the hobbits, whatever. You know what I mean? It's very, very similar, and I think that this is something which we're only, again, beginning to understand, that today it's only us, But in the past there were lots of different types of human population, all coexisting in some manner. Now, whether they got on with each other, whether they would continually bashed each other on the head or whatever, we don't know. But somehow they managed to interbreed, and that in many ways civilization rose as a result of that interbreeding and the legacy that was passed on from these archaic human populations.
Now, is the general public embracing the theories behind this, or is it kind of a slow-moving? How does this become a part of the general consensus of our history?
Well, I mean, only in the last week or two, there have been a lot more about the Denisovans coming out. I mean, they found a bone, again, inside the Denisova cave, which is half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. And it's first generation, so that is absolute living proof, as it were, that the two mated with each other. But off the back of this, there's been a load of other stories to do with the Denisovans where it's actually now been admitted that they were smarter than us around 40,000 years ago, plus the fact that they were of extreme stature. And that's all within the last couple of weeks. So these ideas are now becoming mainstream. But beyond that, it's a case of, well, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar. My background is journalism, and, are these ideas being accepted by your audience? My audience, for the most part, is the ancient mysteries audience, and they don't see things as orthodox as archaeologists do. I mean, they believe that there was a lost civilization that seeded our own sometime around the end of the last ice age, and there's a lot to suggest that this is the case. So where did this lost civilization come from? And there are two main theories at the moment. One is that there was a lost continent called Atlantis, talked about by Plato, the Greek philosopher, and that this sank, and that the survivors brought their knowledge and wisdom to create the civilizations of the East and the West, everything from Egypt and Babylon to those of Mesoamerica and Southern America. The other theory, which is obviously very popular now, is to do with ancient aliens. The idea that aliens either directly or indirectly influenced the foundations of civilization. And both of these ideas have got merits. But what we now have is another alternative, let's say a third route. And this is the fact that people that were smarter than us in the past, i.e. the Denisovans, handed civilization on a plate to us sometime around 40 to 45,000 years ago. And that's what I try to show occurred in the Cygnus Key. One of the principal symbols that they used was the swan, this swan ancestry, hence the title of the book, The Cygnus Key.
You say you're not a scholar, but when you go through your book, I mean, it's a very thorough study. And it's I'm going to say it's less opinion. I mean, you put out a lot of, I'm going to say for the most part, facts. And it's really for the reader to decide whether or not it's something that they can take with them. What do you work? You said you're working on something for the future. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I've got a new book that's already with the publishers called Denisovan Dawn, which
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just when I look at a book like the Cygnus Key, and I'm like, well, this guy probably has like 6 books in the works. It just seems not only do you have a love of writing, it seems, but you have a lot of information. And it's like, there's no way you just come off as somebody who wants to just, all right, you're on to the next thing. And not because you're looking for topics, but I think for the most part, because you keep uncovering more and more information. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, look, when you write a book, you propose certain ideas, you create certain theories. And if your theories are correct, you will always find more information, to confirm that.
Sure.
So that's why, you write another book to, further those ideas. And that's exactly what I've done with most of my life. Most of my ideas have ended up being shown to be correct in one way or another. And I think that one of the reasons for this is because I do work with intuition. I do work with intuitive people. I mean, to me, a Saturday night is, my mate Richard coming round to the house. We will, work with meditations, come up with certain ideas, focus on a particular period of history, and share those thoughts, go back into meditation, come out again, and we'll do this for a whole evening. Mm. That's my idea of a good night out, I mean, unfortunately, I'm very sad in that way. But it gives them some great material to work with. Now, you can't use that material, but what you can do is go away and see if any of it makes sense. And very often it does. Now, this is something that an academic won't do. They will only go by imperial, information that's already been recorded in books, whether it be from archaeology or prehistory or genetics, anthropology. They will only work with that, whereas I will work with intuition. And I believe that allows me to get, to move forward at a faster pace than archaeologists. But eventually they catch up. It might be, a few years, 10 years, but they will eventually catch up. And then quite clearly, when they do catch up, they never credit you, of course. But I don't care. That doesn't bother me.
You said you meditate. I do transcendental meditation, and I was just wondering, do you do a form of meditation, or are you at a point where you don't really focus on a technique, you just meditate?
Yeah, I mean, meditation is easy. I mean, all I would do is, have a quiet room, maybe a couple of candles burning, a little bit of incense, some music that you've set aside specifically for meditations. And then you just visualize yourself essentially going somewhere. I mean, not just some kind of desert island beach or something like that, but a place in the past, whether it be the Great Pyramid, Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey, the Altai Mountains of Siberia. And, you do it with the belief that when you get there, you might meet somebody, you might be shown something, there might be some shaman there that wants to show you what he's up to and convey some information. Yes, it's imagination, of course it is, but somehow it might be unlocking certain keys inside your brain, whether it be from your own ancestry, whether it be from somewhere else through the process of entanglement or something. We don't know. I mean, it could be anything, but it throws up interesting ideas.
I get the same type of thing. I've meditated daily for about 20 years, and I do 20-minute sessions a day. And I personally think, I think a lot of people might disagree, but some of my best ideas and opinions and just outlook on life have come from those little tiny 20-minute sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Andrew Collins, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me. If somebody wants to reach out to you, what is the best way to contact you? Or do you do autographings or anything like that?
Autographing, that sounds fun. No, not really. But the Cygnus Key, just click Amazon or Barnes & Noble and you can get a copy. But if you want to contact me, and I'm always happy to hear from people, just go through to my website, which is andrewcollins.com. You can email me via that. Also, obviously, follow me on Twitter, which is at Andrew B. Collins, or obviously Facebook. Find me on Facebook.
I'll put a link to everything in the show notes as well as on the website, including all of your Amazon books. You have a number of really fascinating topics, not just the Cygnus Key, but You have a lot of really phenomenal books, Gods of Eden, Beneath the Pyramids. Just, you have great titles, too. Like, Beneath the Pyramids, it's like you have to pick up that book and, start looking through it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I try.
No, I think, I was just talking to an author the other day, and she was saying how, like, she's terrible with coming up with titles. And her titles were very long. Like, she did seem to struggle, but she had good time.
Oh, Lena, leave if you will, but cry. Oh, Lena, I don't want to be left alone to be decently in my sorrowful throne. Oh, Lena, why are your eyes so dry? Does one make a fool for being confused? Or is it a symptom of being used? Is it known to be true that I've got a screw with you stomping around town through my puddle of blue? Oh, Lena, why are your eyes so dry? Oh, Lena, lead if you will, but cry. Oh, Lena, I don't want to be left alone to be simply in my sorrowful throne. Oh, Lena, why are your eyes so dry? And it's only been 2 weeks since then that you strung me up. And in 2 weeks more, I'll be dried to the core. And you'll be, I think you'll be sweating like a peach. Cartoons of my dread, but you only seem to telegraph Morse code instead. This bed fell away. Life is gonna stay. Oh,